Hey, Marin. Great questions. Here are my thoughts. Are the meat industries aware of how big an impact they make on people's health? By and large, no, because it's not in their best interest to even ask the question. There's a great line that was quoted in Al Gore's film An Inconvenient Truth that it's hard to get someone to see the truth when their salary depends on not understanding it. Something like that. I think it was an Upton Sinclair quote from his book, The Jungle, this is written about 120 years ago, about the slaughterhouses and the meat packing industry in the United States. And it's true today. So I subscribe to a Progressive Farmer magazine, which is a magazine for, among other things, cattle producers, and they're all this great protein and the vitamins that you can supposedly only get from animals, and how to convince other people that the vegetarian stuff is just slander. So by and large, they are in the process of not looking at the facts, looking for those tiny little blips of studies that suggest that maybe it's not so bad. So just taking things out of context. It's as if, you went and you videotaped yourself shooting free throws for an entire day, and shot 4,000 free throws and you made 7 of them. And you put those together into a highlights reel, one after the other, and that's all you showed people. Second question, since plant-based foods tend to be more expensive, are there other ways to advertise a healthier diet as more accessible? So I'm going to argue with the first half of your premise that plant-based foods are more expensive. So first of all, the plant-based foods that are staples for most people around the world are staples for the peasants, for the poor people, for the commoners. And those include potatoes, sweet potatoes, rice, beans, lentils, legumes, nuts, the kinds of things that grow, corn, wheat, sorghum, millet, the sort of stuff that is easy to grow, easy to harvest, stores, and can provide a lot of calories for people. And that's precisely the stuff that we're feeding to the cows and the chickens and all the other farmed animals. And roughly about 1/10 of the calories that we put into the animals can we eat if we even had a perfectly efficient system, just because of all the energy that the animals use to consume that food. So plant-based foods, when you're eating simple, natural, unprocessed plant-based foods as the predominant part of your diet, are much cheaper than animal products. If you want someone who's on a real budget and they just eat lentils and beans and rice, they're going to be much better off than if they're trying to go into the section of the supermarket that sells meat. The second reason is that plant-based foods can appear more expensive is that the animal foods industry is heavily subsidized by the government through the Farm Bill and other appropriations and checkoffs. Their marketing is paid for by the government. Their waste is not considered, when they pollute the rest of the world, they don't have to clean it up. When they draw down our aquifers, the water sources that are the common property of all of us who live on this land, they don't have to pay for that. They get to graze in parks, in national parks, and they get huge subsidies on the plant foods that are grown to feed animals, like corn and soy. So it's been estimated that if you took away all that and they had to play a fair game, you would have to pay $55 for a hamburger. So the second half of your question, are there ways to advertise a healthier diet as more accessible? Simply telling people and showing people that what their grandparents were eating, their poor grandparents who emigrated from their home countries, was a culturally appropriate, healthy, plant-based diet with small amounts of meat, simply because they couldn't afford any more. Okay, besides one person's individual health, would the decrease in factory farmed animals make an impact on the wider global health, like disease outbreaks? Gosh, in so many ways it would. So clearly, domesticated animals are a huge vector for disease coming from the wild because we're in close proximity to them. farmed animals, whether factory farmed or just sort of herded, in third world countries through things like Heifer International, are definitely vectors of all sorts of disease. And then when we use their manure for growing our vegetables, then we can contaminate our plants as well. Um, the concentrations of large amounts of animals means that we have to build waste lagoons. We have to create very unnatural processes for not getting sick and dying from the effluvium from their waste. Another way is that the animal agriculture industry is the world's largest contributor to global warming, to greenhouse gas um, accumulation in the atmosphere. And one of the reasons is that methane is something like 17 times more persistent in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. So even if we solved all of our global warming problems now, we still have this methane in the environment for hundreds and hundreds of years. That's going to still contribute to global warming. And obviously, global warming is a huge impact on human health, from uh, loss of habitat. Humans are going to have to leave large areas, from vectors of disease moving north. Um, we now have fire ants that used to be tropical only are now in our backyard, and they're killing earthworms. So we're at risk of losing crops because the earthworms aren't producing the soil that we need. Um, the animal foods industry is inherently dangerous to work in. To work in a slaughterhouse or to work in a feedlot means a very dangerous job in which there's lots of not only repetitive strain injury but acute injuries and deaths. It's not a job where people want to work, so you tend to get very, very uneducated people, very economically deprived people, illegal immigrants, and of course there's the human health aspect of consuming these animal products. So most animals who live in factory farms are just this side of death. So they have to be drugged heavily just to keep them alive. And also the antibiotics that are used, about 80% of all antibiotics prescribed and used in the United States are for animals, not for humans. And so we have on the one hand, the incidence of antibiotic resistant superbugs, because the more antibiotics we pour in, the small percentage of the microbes that can survive them then reproduce unchecked, and we have bugs, we have bacteria that we cannot treat anymore. So sort of the age, this golden age of penicillin, that you wouldn't die from a simple cut, from a scrape, from an infection, is coming to an end, largely because of animal agriculture. The other reason that they love antibiotics, aside from the fact that the animals are kept in such unhealthy conditions, they're at death's door, is that antibiotics tend to fatten up the animals. It makes them heavier, which means you can get more money because you sell them by the pound. And of course, humans are consuming all of those antibiotics as well. And we are also getting fatter, except we don't make money by being fatter because no one's selling us by the pound. There's also all the runoff that goes into the oceans, and we now have depressed fish from all the antidepressants, from all the chemicals. We have many other parts of the ecosystem are being affected by our abuse of animals. So yeah, in terms of global health, and also the inequalities. If you have a plot of land in a third world country and you're using it to feed cows and not people, of course people are going to be starving, and they're not going to get the nutrients they need because they can't afford the food that they're growing for export. Do our food choices have an effect on our mental health? Absolutely. There are clear connections between a poor diet and depression and anxiety. Partly, there may be mechanisms in our microbiome, in our large intestines. It was thought that depression was simply a matter of the brain, but it turns out that serotonin and dopamine and other neurotransmitters are produced by the metabolism of fiber in the large intestine. That about 90% of the serotonin in our body which is the neurotransmitter implicated in depression. If we don't have enough of it moving around in our system, 90% of that lives in our gut. And we produce it when we eat lots of high fiber foods, which are plant-based foods. And it's actually repressed by the consumption of animal foods. Also, that if we have a poor diet, we're just additionally stressed in general. And when you add life stress, family stress, work stress, it can be the thing that sort of pushes us over the edge. I hope this is helpful. Let me know if you have any other questions. Say hi to everybody.